Darkest Dungeon is on Kickstarter right now. Let me tell you in this video why you should not be backing it. Now, first up, I want to tell you the whole reason that this video is coming out when it's coming out is because I have been waiting to see what the latest game from Mythic Games. The timing of this video is purposeful. A lot of other videos have come out sooner than this, prior to this, talking about why you should or should not back this game. Let me be very clear. I have been waiting for more of the game to reveal itself, for more of the stretch goals to be hit, see what's coming up the pipeline from Mythic Games' latest creation of Darkest Dungeon. And so by timing it now, hopefully I will have enough of an opinion by what's out there in terms of the product, in terms of the playthrough, to give you more of an opinion. I think doing a video earlier on in this campaign just would not give you the full look of where things are at now. I have been following closely. I am a current backer, but what this video is going to tell you is where my opinion stands and whether or not I'm going to be backing it, whether I suggest backing it for you or not, and ultimately what my recommendation would be. Now, flat out at the beginning of the video, I said don't back this. I stand by that. I would not back this game. Let me tell you why I would not back this game. And then I will also tell you why I would back this game if you are seriously interested. So this is not a judgment of saying you're right or you're wrong, but this is where my personal stance is. First up, Mythic Games has a relatively uneven track record to this point. This will be campaign number 6 when this finishes that really has not been fulfilled yet for Mythic Games. The current ones being Darkest Dungeon, Hell, The Last Saga, Steam Watchers, Enchanters, East Quest, Joan of Arc 1.5, as well as Solomon Kane. For this reason, and for a couple reasons I'm going to go into in a minute, they are becoming basically CMON 2.0 at this point. Let's face it, CMON has actually a relatively proven track record in terms of gameplay and the actual review of their games themselves. The Kickstarters, the communication, a lot on that side, to be very frank, has been piss poor at times. That being said, they put out a relatively well thought of product despite what a lot of the ranting always comes up during their Kickstarter campaigns seems to protest otherwise. Say what you want about the FOMO or the fear of missing out from their campaigns because it's real. They offer a lot of Kickstarter exclusives. They offer a lot of basically buyer beware tactics. Now, why am I saying that it's very similar in Mythic? Because that's the way this campaign is structured. You have a big 1 or 2 pledge system, and then you have a bunch of add-ons. Now, I think we sort of got the impression from their last game, Hell, The Last Saga, that they were going away from this model, that they had said, okay, this is the main difference, you're getting all of this stuff, there's no add-ons, it's straightforward. They seem to have backtracked with this model to their previous campaign, and that makes me a little bit concerned about what's going to end up happening with this. Now, why am I relating it to CMON? Well, you've got stretch goals that are now stretching into just certain expansions. You're having expansion after expansion after expansion. And I even saw someone comment tonight in response to another backer online saying, how much do I need to back, in order to get, a good quality product? And the answer was, well, if you want the complete game, it's going to cost you upwards of $300 potentially. Now, I don't think that's what they actually meant as a complete game, because I think you are getting a complete game. But especially with these larger miniature Kickstarters nowadays, as with the CMON games, you almost feel like you're not getting the complete game if you don't get the expansions, because you're missing out, even at retail, those additional stretch goals that get thrown in there. Now, I know that they have said already, Mythic Games has already put out there that they're going to be selling these games and the expansions on their retail page, on their web store. To what extent, to what availability, to what stretch goals get met by that, no one really knows. I think it's also worth saying that the development of several of the other games in the pipeline is worth noting. As I mentioned earlier, several of these games are still not out. They are still not in backers' hands. They are just fulfilling Super Fantasy Brawl as we speak. And I have to be concerned, as concern was raised with other CMON games and with even Awakened Realms, of how much resources are going into each individual project, and are you spreading yourself too thin? The other component that this game doesn't have that a lot of the other properties and games that they have made recently is that they're dealing with the issue of a licensed IP. Now, if you're familiar with that at all, as I have been recently with the Street Fighter miniatures, the game with Angry Joe and Jasco and all that stuff, they had to deal with Sony. And there is a lot of back and forth and approving and changing and modifying and approving and changing and modifying that ends up delaying things significantly. And from this game, I would assume that a large portion of that has been taken care of just by how much they have out there in terms of prototypes and cards and development. But at the same time, I also sort of thought that with the Street Fighter one. So I really don't know how that is going to affect the back end of things. Street Fighter, the miniatures game, is going to be almost 2 years late by the time we get it. And I'm not even sure, they promised by the end of 2020, I'm not even sure that's going to happen at this point. So when Mythic Games is telling me that this pledge is going to be November 2021, so a year away from now, with all of those other projects in the pipeline, with all of the licensed IP issues that I know that go along with properties like this, I have to believe that's sort of a pipe dream. I can't see you getting this game before 2022. Now, I will be the first to tell you that if you're backing a game solely based on whether or not you're going to get it on time or not, Kickstarter is not for you in the first place. But I would also say that this date is horribly underselling things unless they really are much, much, much farther along than they're letting on. And if it is, great. I'm all for it. But I can't say that that's the case. Now, why is this also like CMON? It's because I think, like I mentioned earlier, you have a big FOMO aspect going on. So I'll say this right now. If you're going to back this, go all in. I think that is going to be the best option. Now, also realizing that is not necessarily a financially able option for everyone out there. But I think the least risk is actually with the all-in this sense. Because of where those stretch goals are laying out through the expansions, because of the questionable availability of the expansions, I think that that is going to be where the most value is. But I think you're easily going to be talking $350 then, as opposed to the base pledge with the one expansion with the stretch goals of $150. And that's a $200 difference. That is a lot of game difference for one game, one table, a whole lot of closet space. So my personal recommendation is you're either all in or you're all out. I would not go halvesies with this one. It doesn't make a lot of sense logistically to me from that side of things. I think there's a higher risk, especially with just a base game pledge in these Kickstarters, especially if it actually turns out to be good and their availability starts to be difficult. You're going to make the most money or lose the least amount of money with an all-in pledge. Base level pledges, oftentimes in these campaigns that are running in the high 5-figure digit backers, you will always be able to pick up at cost or well below cost of a base pledge, whether that's either pledge that they're offering currently. Let me be very clear though, this is not an indictment on how good or not I think the game will be. I think the game has a lot of potential, and I think people are really going to like it when they play it. It does offer something unique and different than a lot of the other dungeon crawlers out there do. But does it entice me enough in terms of the differences, in terms of the main feature that I worry about nowadays of being able to get to the table easily, repetitively, with low overhead? No, it doesn't. Just watching the gameplay videos from people like Quackalope and other sites, it's hard to get to the table. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of upkeep. I hate the word fiddliness. I don't think fiddliness is an apt way of describing this. There's just almost too much going on because they tried to stay so true to the video game. And now, again, cards on the table, I've never played the video game. So I can't compare one to the other and say, well, this is clearly right or this is clearly wrong. No, I have no judgment on that side of things. But it worries me that when you try to make it exactly the same as the video game, you're going to overdo things in terms of what is going to be easy to get to the table. Now, you people are going to say, I can get it to the table. This is my core base. I love this game. This is my IP. You guys are going to probably love this game. This is going to be great for you. And it's got enough nuance in how you're exploring the dungeon and the combat and a few of those things in terms of going back then to the city and going to the various shops and leveling them up. But there's just so much upkeep that comes with all of that minutia that I just can't see myself getting it to the table over a lot of the other dungeon crawlers that I own already. The other thing I worry about with this game is several of the concepts and ideas, as I'm reading through the rulebook, as I'm watching the gameplay videos, seem a little bit superfluous or a little bit over the top for the sake of being over the top in terms of how complicated it needs to be. Stances, for example. I understand that there are different stances and you're trying to incorporate that. And what was explained to me was that, well, certain skills or enemies might force you into a stance that you don't want to be in, and then you have to use an action to get back to a stance you want. Well, I just don't, it just seems unnecessary from a gameplay standpoint, that's how it's going to affect you in that sense. It's just basically going to take away one of your actions on the turn. That's all it's really doing, but somehow you've incorporated a whole other element that people have to worry about. So things like that do not interest me. Things like rolling every single time for these detriments that you have no control over. Again, I say this as a person who loves rolling dice. It just doesn't appeal to me. And I can't think that it was going to appeal to people who want the ability to mitigate some of these circumstances in advance, because you really can't. I think they have unique mechanisms. I think the stress is interesting. I think how the overarching boss affecting you in the dungeons that you're in while you're in them and what you have to do is very new, and I like the fact that they're going a little bit outside of the wheelhouse of other dungeon crawlers in that sense. But ultimately, these new nuances to the dungeon crawl genre aren't enough to outweigh my concerns that go with Mythic in general, as well as whether or not it's going to hit the table in place of something else. So that's the main reason I say don't back this. At the same time, if this is what really appeals to you and you love the IP and you love these nuances and you can get it to the table, go ahead and back it. I'm not saying you're wrong in that sense either. So I'm not meaning to discriminate or, irritate people for the sake of doing it. But this is a game that I think a lot of people are getting sucked into based on the IP and not looking closely at the nitty-gritty details. This reminds me very much of Dark Souls, which was really one of the first big video game crossovers into the tabletop world. And it sucked a lot of people in based on the IP alone. And then, because Steamforged Games actually tried to stay what they thought was relatively true to the video game, the end product, the combination of those two things, the end product was not very well received. It had a lot more detractors than people that were pleased with what they ended up with. And I think this has that sense. Now, I think different from that game is I think this will be much more well received in general, but I think you're going to have a lot of people that didn't realize a lot of these issues that I've mentioned going into it, in terms of the nuance, in terms of the complexity, in terms of how the combat and how the exploration is different than under other dungeon crawlers. I'm hopeful that that's not the case, but with this many people backing, let's be frank, there's a lot that are not doing their due diligence, that have money to burn, and that are going to then lose money when they have to try and flip this later on. Are you getting your money's worth? On the core pledges, I think you absolutely are getting your money's worth. I think the expansions, especially in any Kickstarter like this, are always where you're getting less value for the money that you're spending. The campaign has about a week left, and if they're timing it anything like a CMON campaign, which it seems very much so like they are in terms of staggering the expansions so that they get the uptick and keep on, keeping the train moving, I think there's going to be at least one more expansion. And from what I have heard at this point too, there is also at least one area of Darkest Dungeon, the video game, that has not been explored, if not two, I can't remember exactly. So expect that there's going to be another $50 on top of whatever else is already there. If you're one of those people who says, I'm getting X amount of miniatures for X amount of dollars and that's a great price and I'm going to use this for D&D and I'm going to use this for other stuff, this is one for you. This is a great one from that side of things. It's got a great level of variability in terms of the models, in terms of the monsters, in terms of the amount that you're getting. But again, that is not enough anymore to make me just back it at this level because of what else I can get in place of it, and several of the other games that I'm looking at that are very similar, that are going to compete not only for closet space, but table space in the upcoming future, like Monster Hunter, like Primal the Awakening, like a couple that I've got waiting, like Bard Sung that's coming up, the other Kickstarter campaigns that I've already got going, Midara, the upcoming sequels to Midara, things like Aeon Trespass Odyssey, all of those games are competing against this, and I can only have so many of those. And so when I look at this by itself, it looks good. When I start comparing it to those other products that I've either already ordered, already have, or am looking forward to, that is where it loses its shine considerably. And that is what you have to remember with Kickstarter, is the latest and greatest is always the one that seems to be right in front of you. And you have to be aware of that, and you have to take a step back and hold. And that's why, for me, in conclusion, I will not be backing this, and I suggest that you think about that as well. Thanks for watching. Stay classy. I'll see you next time.